Hi everybody, my name is Stephanie Lessard-Blanc, and I'm going to take you on a quick journey today to look at the world of pollination and insect pollinators, or other types of pollinators as well, just in the backyard of our house today. So you can see a lot of the relationship between the types of pollinators that visit flowers and how the flowers benefit from that as well. So, first of all, what is pollination? We keep throwing this word around. What does it mean? Well, basically what happens is you have a flower, and from the flower's point of view, it wants to move its pollen from the anthers, which are on those red dots there on the flower, to the stigma on another flower, and the stigma is this piece here in the center. Plants can do this using a lot of different tools, but usually they do this with the wind or through the help of animal pollinators. So you can see in this picture, the bee here is the pollinator. It's moving the pollen from one flower to the stigma on the other flower. The flower then is able to use that pollen to create seeds, and the seeds can then be dispersed to produce more plants. And the idea there is that the plant wants to reproduce, the plant wants to make more plants, and the pollinator gets a reward too. The pollinator gets a reward of nectar that the plant produces specifically to draw that pollinator in. So what kinds of animals are pollinators? We saw a bee right there, but there's lots of them. There's actually tons of different kinds of pollinators. Birds can be pollinators, and bees can be pollinators, even bats can be pollinators. But what kinds of things are they attracted to? There's actually a whole world of communication between flowers and their pollinators that exists. In the world of flowers, they can choose, or they have evolved, specific tools like color, size, and shape to attract certain kinds of pollinators to their flowers to help them spread their pollen to other plants. In the case of butterflies and birds, both of those animals really like the color red. Both butterflies and birds have long appendages that they use to help them access the nectar. Here's a butterfly tongue. It's a long straw-like apparatus called a proboscis, and they can unroll it and enter a long tubular flower. And this, here you can see on this hummingbird, the bill is long and thin, and they can drink nectar through their long, thin bill. So they're going to be attracted to flowers that are red, usually, and have that long, thin, tubular shape. Let me show you an example. So here we have a really beautiful example of a plant that's trying to draw in pollinators. This is coral honeysuckle, and as you can see, it has that beautiful red color that's attractive to birds like hummingbirds and butterflies, and has that long tubular shape that the butterfly can get its proboscis into and the bird can put its bill into. The long tubular shape means that when the pollinator approaches the flower, it can get the pollen, which is on the anthers out here, right on its little face, so it can easily transfer the pollen from one flower to another. And the nectar reward is down at the base of the flower. So if we open this flower up and we take a quick look inside, what you can see is this glistening nectar right here. So that's the wet, sticky liquid down here. And that's the sugary nectar that the butterflies and the birds are looking for when they go to drink nectar from the flowers. And tastes pretty good for humans too. All right. The thing is that not all flowers are bright and showy, and not all pollinators are going to be attracted to the same kind of flower. I'll show you a really neat example here. This plant behind me, this is something called wild ginger. Wild ginger is another native plant, and a really cool thing about wild ginger is that it hides its flowers close to the ground. So let me take you down to show you. When we look underneath the leaves, we can see dark red hidden flowers under the leaves. And those dark red flowers help us understand the kind of pollinator that would be attracted to this particular plant. They like to attract insects that live on the ground, like beetles, to come and pollinate these flowers. So they're going to put them down close to the ground where the beetles can easily access them. If we take a close look inside the flower, You can get a sense of where the anthers and the stigma are on this flower too. It's a really striking, unusual flower to have in your garden. We've talked about birds, we've talked about butterflies, we've talked about beetles, but what about bees? Bees are what everybody thinks of when you think about pollinators, and that makes sense because there are a lot of bees out there and they do a lot of the pollinating work. Bees are particularly attracted to flowers that are yellow or blue or white, and they also really like flowers that they can land on so that they can stand and drink their nectar in peace without having to hover in place. So flowers like these are really attractive to bees. This is a yellow garden rose, and this is a native flower called Eastern Blue Star. And these are attracted to often different kinds of bees. You can see the bowl shape of the yellow garden rose helps the bee approach the flower, get into the center, and easily pick up pollen from the anthers while drinking nectar from the center of the flower. That helps it easily transfer the pollen from one flower to the next flower that it visits. Something like Eastern Blue Star has all of its flowers together in clumps. That helps it easily transfer pollen from one flower to the next flower. The blue color here is also really attractive, and the small shape means that this will be a really attractive flower for a smaller bee. There's a lot of variety in different bee shapes and sizes. So we've talked about how the flower color, shape, and size can all help attract the right pollinator to that plant. But it actually can get a little bit more complicated than that. Bees see the world a little differently than we do. They can actually see into the ultraviolet, which means that a flower that looks yellow to us, like this dandelion and this buttercup, have a really different appearance to the bees when the bees are flying around. So if you look at these two, both of them, both very beautiful yellow flowers, both very attractive to bee pollinators, they actually look really different to something like a bee. What we see is this yellow buttercup or this yellow dandelion. What the bee sees has a totally different shape. It has a bullseye right in the center, a bullseye that helps attract the bee to the center where the nectar reward is and where the pollen is so that the plant can easily transfer that pollen to another plant. We can see this on some plants ourselves. Some plants have evolved colors that make it really obvious, like on this pansy, where the color really clearly indicates where the insect pollinator should go. And also on this Herb Robert, which is a type of geranium, type of wild geranium. And both of these flowers have nectar guides, and those are the lines or the indicators that help the bee figure out where to go to get its nectar reward. But for those flowers that appear yellow to us, remember, those nectar guides might be hidden in the ultraviolet. One of the really cool things that happens with flowers and their pollinators is that sometimes the flowers and the insects can get a little bit tricky with each other. For example, this flower, this is a snapdragon. Snapdragons have this really complicated, really beautiful petal structure where they need exactly the right weight insect to come and land on this lower petal to open the door to get to where the nectar reward is at the base of the flower and the pollen is here at the top. So the right size insect can come right here, crawl in the door, and you can see, you can imagine a bee crawling into that space. The pollen would touch them on their back where they can't easily clean it off. And then they would get their nectar reward and fly off to the next flower, open the door, and easily transfer that pollen to the stigma right here in the center between the different anthers. But some insects, especially some kinds of bees, don't necessarily want to carry the pollen because the pollen is heavy. Or sometimes when there's a very long flower like this and they only have short little tongues, they need another way to get to the nectar reward. So they'll actually go up to a flower that has a long tubular structure like this, and they'll cut open a little hole at the base of the flower and crawl in there, allowing them to get to the nectar reward at the base of the flower without ever having to pollinate the flower. So you can see sometimes it gets a little bit complicated. The huge variety of insects and flowers that we have on this planet need our support. And the best thing that you can do, if you have a little bit of space, is to plant flowers that bloom at different times of year and that bloom in different shapes and styles. So these are the different flowers that we have been looking at today. You can see the coral honeysuckle, the snapdragons, the buttercups, the eastern blue star, the dandelion. You can see the Sir Robert right here. All of these different types of flowers are really beneficial to different kinds of pollinators and can help support these types of animals in your own backyard. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Have a great day.